So Brett and Heather have this idea that natural selection is kind of this really compelling thing that's beyond their understanding, and then they proceed to sort of ignore the fact that's beyond their understanding and show a lack of humility, sort of couched in humble adjacent language that doesn't really qualify. Because to think in terms of natural selection, one has to start by working backwards. We start with human beings with an intellect localized enough into a single skull to conceive of powerful, elaborate processes such as natural selection, which span millions of years, and perform a culling mechanism that's so remarkable that it resulted in a machine capable of looking in on itself and introspecting and making conscious changes. But then they act as though there's no evidence whatsoever that this condition operates anywhere except for inside a human skull, and maybe not even in all of those, rather than taking for granted the fact that anywhere that the systems are in place to perform similar activities as inside a human skull, therefore there must also be agents capable of introspection. And it's immediately obvious in a lot of very simple ways. At the very least, there's all kinds of mechanisms for healing, which is a form of introspection that looks at a community of cells and sees that some kind of functionality is missing or damage has occurred. Immune systems are similar. The immune system is engaged in an unbelievably complicated processing in order to, first of all, just imagine how hard it is for a set of molecular machines to understand and do something about whether a new machine that's been built is properly assembled. Quality checking. This is something that's fundamental to your immune system, to your gametes, really to every part of you. There is a pruning system going on inside the uterus and around the ovaries and inside the testes and in the thalamus that are as sophisticated as an entire ecosystem in, say, the Amazon rainforest or something like that. There are that many different active agents applying different standards of what is acceptable, triggering different mechanisms that result in branching behavior. It's all there, and that's in microcosm that is represented in macrocosm. And it's also represented over and over in different places doing subtly different jobs. The immune system inside a squirrel is enough like the immune system inside you that there are similar parts performing similar functions. There's the famous example of serotonin as being something that lobsters use. Serotonin is also something that microscopic worms react to. And serotonin is produced in the lining of your gut. People talk about thinking with their gut, and there's actually enough nervous system activity in the gut and a complicated enough problem in the gut that's as though there's a whole other person living in there whose sole job is to understand the parts of the outside world that come through the alimentary canal. There's all these bacteria and viruses and parasites and potential sources of nutrition and poisons and just things that change your pH and your water level and your electrolyte level. Electrolyte level is actually, I think, just directly related to pH. But in any case, this is the elaborate system that, natural selection creates. It's a bunch of sophisticated machines capable of some sort of direction. And it's not pure homeostasis. We don't just sit there trying to be the same. We're active agents that set out to do sophisticated branching tasks. That's even if you don't worry about how high this ladder's up and you just think in terms of like animals and humans and their role in the ecology together, or plants or whatever. And so the idea is that all of this arose in a Conway game of life style where just the atoms and the nature of the way atoms interact was enough for stable forms to persist over time. Once the stable forms persisted, they scaffolded up to other, more elaborate, more sophisticated, more flexible, stable forms. And in fact, on some level, the arc of the entire universe appears to be an origination point of somewhat homogeneous chaos in the sense of, purposelessness or lack of differentiation that over time coheres into more and more stable forms of increasing sort of abstract rarity. So in other words, if you spill a bunch of raw material into space, then you're virtually guaranteed that it'll never make a strand of DNA. But once that process has gone on long enough, that random material coalesces into places where DNA can arise as a function of the increasing differentiation of all these stable forms into more and more minute and nuanced shapes. And that's the mechanism at work, and that's just in the chemistry. And then thanks to Michael Levin, what we're seeing is that there's an electrical landscape that we've just been ignoring. And the electrical landscape actually helps fill in a lot of holes about, how is it that these communities of what seem to be the legacy of a single-celled organism past where, there was just little bubbles with some stuff in them, and they all bounced around looking for nutrients. And then eventually they stuck together and became multicellular life of one kind or another. Like, that's what's present today. And for some reason, when you grow, you stop when you're done. And the human form is stable enough that there's only I was about to say there's only a few sizes of shirts, but the point is, you can go to the store and you can buy a shirt, and you don't need shirts to be componentized into number of sleeves and length of trunk and widely varying diameter and stuff. You just need to basically have about 6 or 7 broad categories of shirt, and just about everyone can put one on, and that's because of how stable the human form is. And you could make shirts for chimps, and you could make shirts for whales, and you would be able to do it with some regularity because all the forms are regular. Human beings aren't snowflakes or something. Or we're not like trees, for example, where there's no particular number of branches we expect to have or something the trees don't expect to have a particular number of branches, for example. In any case, that stability is at the core of what's happening. So now let's reason backwards. That stability occurs in the electrical space too. There's electrical stability. There's strong currents driven by the electromagnetic field of the Earth. And they have stability of various kinds. They produce stabilities. Now, we don't know the first thing about what these things are doing. We don't have a good image of what the electrical universe looks like on Earth. We're just starting to scratch the surface on what might hold. I think everyone recognizes that on some level our thoughts have an electrical presence, because of course, what else would be going on, right? There's all these neurons, and the neurons are creating electrical discharges. But it goes beyond that. There's also information stored everywhere else in all the other molecules in the form of electrical potential. So, having said that, and understanding our total ignorance of it and the exciting new potential that Michael Levin's discovering, let's go one step above that. The sun is much older than the Earth. And if chemistry proceeds at a certain pace due to, energy limitations, if you're the Arctic Circle, your chemistry goes slower. If you're if you're near the surface of the Earth and you're near the equator, then your chemistry will go faster. Maybe too fast, but the point is that's still just an adaptation thing. And we can see just heuristically that life really thrives in the shallow water around coastlines, because you get the energy from the sun there, you've got some warm temperatures, and you have the medium of water, which makes it very easy for, this sort of petri dish of life to perpetuate. On the sun, one can only imagine how much more rapid and sophisticated the selection process for energy forms must be. And we have to imagine, because we have no idea. And for someone to just say that, well, obviously there's nothing there that can remain coherent because it's, a plasma. You have no reason to say that. You have no reason to know that. In fact, if you just take the evidence of what's before us in terms of life on Earth, it seems completely obvious that the sun has an incredibly sophisticated ecosystem, and that ecosystem is engaged in broadcasting vast amounts of coherent information along a vast spectrum of radio and light and radiation. So when you look up at that thing, you should really be asking yourself, what role did it play in life on Earth? Because we know at the very least it transmitted energy. But what else might it be transmitting? There's an interesting possibility that what we should be doing with our solar arrays is treating them like sort of like personality engrams for AIs to train on. Just take that raw data that they can detect, make them more nuanced than just something that like conducts electricity, and have it be something that actually collects data about a broad spectrum of what the sun is emitting as they collect it, and use that in some way to influence the personality of the AI. I'd just be curious what would happen. It's an experiment. But at any rate, once you start thinking in those terms, that you have no idea whatsoever about the impact that the solar ecosystem has via its transmissions on the electrical ecosystem of the Earth, which we know for a fact has an impact on the chemical ecosystem of the Earth, then you're in no way prepared to rule on the idea that, God exists or doesn't, because you're not even recognizing the most obvious agents that affect you. That's what angels are. They're agents that have an effect. And competitive processes seem to be at the root of everything everywhere in nature that we see. So if you need to know how a miracle functions, it might function as simply as rewriting your perception of reality to grasp a truth of some kind that you cannot currently grasp. I mean, we don't know if what this guy was doing was something that just made people believe, or if it was a matter of like, well, the chemistry, the carbohydrates in the body, that's what literally moved him off the ground. And there was a distance that we could have measured with a laser or something. All that would matter is that everyone saw it and believed it. And you can see and believe things as a function of the organization inside your own mind. And coincidentally, you can also refuse to see and believe things as a function of your own mind. And that's the brain in the jar conundrum. Are we in a simulation? The answer is yes. There's no discussion to be had. We're in a simulation. You are a simulation of some set of outside inputs that cohere into a picture of a world, and you have no idea what's actually out there. You just have the simulation you run inside, which isn't even all of who you are, because most of who you are is something that tells stories about that simulation, that tracks trends in that simulation, that has feelings about that simulation, that tries to tell if the simulation is changing over time, like if your hearing starts to go out and then the world becomes a different place because you can't hear as well, or you hear something you don't have an explanation for. trying to understand the difference between the exterior and the internal world in terms of like, phantom limb, or, when you think your phone is buzzing in your pocket, but it's sitting in front of you on the table. I mean, the miracle is that we think that there is something that's real and that it's good. And it doesn't matter why you think it's good. It doesn't matter if it's scientific wonder or spiritual rapture. For some reason, joy and gratitude seem to be something that isn't just a hallucination, but is being communicated between some kinds of things. I don't know what they are, but we do seem to be able to agree on an awful lot about what is real and what isn't. Which is why I think, to return to what Paul said earlier, it's cut and dried. How hard are you going to disbelieve other people? And this is just the fundamental nature of reconciliation and community. Like, you have to believe them, and you have to judge them. Even if they play World of Warcraft. I don't know. I gotta stop saying that. Nobody cares about World of Warcraft. It's not interesting.